brought Oswald to see Marcello. So there's just tons of amazing stuff in these FBI files that no one had ever seen until I came across them in the National Archives. You know, and again, I'm only looking here because people that work with John and Bobby had told me back in '92, you know, look at Carlos Marcello, look at his buddy Santo Trafficante, look at Johnny Roselli. They're the ones that did it. Bobby knew, you know, we're telling you, so you and Tom, you got to go find what Bobby wasn't able to find. So that's what I've spent the last 20 years doing. So you may wonder, if the FBI had all this back in 1985 and 86, why are you hearing about it now? This was a big operation. I'll tell you the secret code name. It's in the book for the first time. Camtex, for Carlos Marcello, Texas. And the FBI didn't just get information from this informant. They got Marcello to commit all sorts of crimes from prison. They got Marcello to pay bribes to the informant, had a pretend best friend who was really an FBI agent that would come to visit the informant every visiting day. And the pretend best friend claimed he had an in at the Bureau of Prisons. So Marcello and his family, they paid the undercover FBI agent bribes 3 times to be moved to nicer prisons. So Marcello went from almost maximum security to medium security to low security to a country club prison. And then the last bribe was supposed to be a bribe that would supposedly get Marcello out of prison, and that's when Marcello, his family, his associates would all be arrested. So you may wonder, well, why are you hearing about this for the first time? You know, why didn't this all come out earlier? Well, we're going to get to that. Because, again, you know, some of you are hearing about Marcello for the first time. Some of you have heard about him before. Congress focused on him in '79. I can go better than that. In the weeks after JFK's murder, the FBI and other law enforcement interviewed or arrested more than a dozen associates of Marcello. But if you look in the Warren Report, and they may have a copy here in the bookstore, or they may be smart and they don't, who knows. But if you look in the Warren Report, you will not see Carlos Marcello's name. Like I say, even though more than a dozen of his associates and family were interviewed or arrested right after JFK's murder. And so, like, what was that cover-up going on? Well, Hoover had a lot to cover up, the FBI director back in the 60s. And I'm sorry if I just throw out terms like Hoover, but yeah, I don't mean Herbert Hoover, the guy who got us into the last depression. I mean J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI director. And so there was a legitimate reason to keep a lot of stuff secret in 1963 at the time of the JFK assassination. Marcello's stuff should have been all made public. Bobby was going after Marcello when JFK died, in fact. But there was a legitimate reason that gave Hoover, CIA officials like Richard Helms, and others excuses to cover up things that only they wanted to cover up. So here's the other big secret that the Kennedy people started telling us back in 1990 that many of you will be hearing for the first time. Here is why our relations with Cuba were frozen with those bullets in Dealey Plaza. And that's because when John F. Kennedy was killed, that day, he and Bobby Kennedy were only 10 days away from overthrowing Fidel Castro, staging a coup against Cuba, and having kind of an invited invasion of Cuba. Now, this is a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis. Everybody here, I take it, knows about the Cuban Missile Crisis, even if you're not old enough to have hidden under your desk like me in my class because you thought you were going to be blown up. Most people in here know about the Bay of Pigs by the year before the Cuban Missile Crisis, which was a big fiasco. So most people know about the first act of the drama, the Bay of Pigs. JFK came out looking bad. Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK came out looking pretty good. You know, he faced down the Russians and the missiles had to come out of Cuba. Nobody, until our first book, Ultimate Sacrifice, knew about the third act of the drama, which was the plan to overthrow Fidel Castro on December 1st, 10 days after Dallas. The CIA's supporting role in that operation, they didn't control it because JFK wasn't stupid. After they messed up the Bay of Pigs, he wasn't about to let them mess something else up. But the CIA had a supporting role in this operation, and it was codenamed AM World. You know, you won't find that word AM World in any book, article before Ultimate Sacrifice. You won't find it in any government report because it was kept hidden from the Warren Commission and from all from the next 5 government committees until we told the JFK Assassination Records Review Board about it. Congress was never told about it. So much was withheld from Congress, you'll hear me talk about tonight. So why did the Kennedys think this would work when the Bay of Pigs had been such a fiasco? Well, they had an inside man in the Cuban government. They had the number 3 man in the Cuban government, the head of the Cuban army, the founder of the Cuban army, the highest black official in Cuba, a country that by many accounts is about 3/4 African descent. So they had this man, and his name is Commander Juan Almeida. And I can't pronounce Spanish at all, so you can look up his name. It's close as I can get it. It's Commander Juan Almeida. So this man, the number 3 guy in Cuba, was working for John and Robert Kennedy in November of 1963. And he was ready to overthrow Fidel Castro for the Kennedys 10 days after Dallas. Now, Almeida had tried to defect before the Bay of Pigs, but the CIA didn't even tell Kennedy about that because the CIA had been working with the mafia since before the election. Remember our good friend Richard Nixon? Nixon thought, well, to get elected president, it would be great if the CIA hired the mafia to kill Fidel Castro right before the '60 election. That was to be the first October surprise. But it didn't work out. Didn't stop the CIA from continuing to work with the mafia. That's why the Bay of Pigs was a failure, because the CIA was counting on the mafia to kill Castro, not these exiles who got captured. So Almeida had wanted to defect or help the U.S. before the Bay of Pigs. CIA turned him down because they had the mafia. They didn't need the number 3 guy in Cuba. Well, we know what happened at the Bay of Pigs. So this time, Commander Almeida went to somebody working directly for Bobby Kennedy, a Cuban exile by the name of Harry Williams, Enrique Ruiz Williams, who always told us to call him Harry Williams. And Harry Williams was in a New York Times article in May of 1963 saying that he was working with Bobby Kennedy on new invasion of Cuba. And boy, Bobby hated seeing that article. Harry hated seeing that article. This was all supposed to be secret. So they squelched all future articles. But in Cuba, Commander Almeida was told about that article. Commander Almeida contacted his old friend, Harry Williams, the exile working for Bobby Kennedy, and said, look, if this article's right, I'll do it. I'll help you guys do it. You're going to have to do what I say and pay me money and take care of my family, and you got to back me with the U.S. military, but I'll do it. And so they did. So it's a pretty amazing story that was told in Ultimate Sacrifice, and we have a much briefer, more concise version in Legacy of Secrecy. And they had gotten Commander Almeida's family out of Cuba before the coup date, before the assassination. Commander Almeida's wife and 2 sons. They had made the first down payment through a Swiss bank. And by the way, one of the CIA officials helping Harry Williams and the Kennedys was a CIA agent by the name of E. Howard Hunt. And some of you will recognize E. Howard Hunt's name. And some of you will recall, well, wasn't Hunt involved with some Cuban exiles and something else called Watergate? Well, yeah, he was. And in fact, most of those exiles he was involved in with Watergate, they were involved in '63 in the JFK Almeida coup plan. So if you read the book, I won't go into it tonight, but you'll also find out a lot about Watergate. So this coup was ready to go down. Now, Bobby Kennedy was a careful person. He was fighting 3 wars, fighting the mafia, fighting for civil rights against racists, and fighting Fidel Castro. The first 2 wars were very public. Everybody knew the Kennedys were after the mafia and after their ally, Jimmy Hoffa. Everybody knew the Kennedys were finally battling racism and fighting for civil rights. But I can tell you, in the fall of '63, nobody knew the Kennedys had this top secret war against Fidel Castro. This was a year after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when we all thought we were going to be blown up. And the Kennedys were deliberately keeping all of this out of the press. They were deliberately not telling most government officials. They would tell a government official, like their own secretary